Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam and this week we're going to take a look at the top 10 albums by legendary Irish singer-songwriter Van Morrison. George Ivan Morrison was born in Belfast in Ireland in 1945. He was a multi-instrumentalist and he went on to form rhythm and blues band Them, who had some seminal big hits with tracks like Gloria, Baby Please Don't Go and Here Comes the Night. But he left them and went solo in 1967, and that started a very, very successful solo career for him, which, whilst probably never achieving the sort of cool cult status of a Dylan or a Neil Young, it's ensured that he's remained one of the finest and most respected of musicians. And he certainly has a place at the top table of singer-songwriters. Famously cantankerous and difficult, despite that reputation, he's also been a frequent collaborator with artists as diverse as Cliff Richard, The Chieftains and John Lee Hooker. But today I'm just going to look at the albums credited to Van Morrison on his own. Van's sheer musicality makes almost all of his albums listenable. I have to admit, as much respect as I have for him, some of his music I do find quite bland. Yet he seems to effortlessly be able to fire off a catchy little pop number and moments of beauty at will. And no doubt that when Van gets it right, he absolutely nails it. His fusing of many, many different musical styles came to be known as Celtic Soul. And from the mid-19 onwards, he hit a remarkable commercial run of 12 of his albums reaching the American top 40. Although I would argue that many would suggest his creative peak was a long time before, in the 1970s. But let's find out. Look, before we get going, another degree of separation from Van Morrison, and that's Van's long-time guitarist Herbie Armstrong, is an old pal of mine with whom I have played and sung many, many times. Herbie, if you ever end up watching this, then much love to you and Lisa. Look, this was one of the harder top 10s I've had to do, not least because of the sheer volume of Van's output. A lot of those later records I had lost touch with, I have to confess. So it's been fun listening to those again. But also because, as you can probably hear, I am not well again. I have a few underlying health issues we're trying to get to the bottom of. And as a result, I'm going to keep the album reviews just a little bit shorter today. So I hope that's okay. But look, let's crack into it. So at number 10... I'm going to put his 14th solo album from 1986, No Guru, No Method, No Teacher. This is generally, I think, regarded as the best of his post-70s albums, and it does sound like an 80s album. You know, you've got saxophones on here, bright piano, plenty of 80s reverb across everything. And if you love that sound and want it in a really nice, mellow, low-key vibe, then this record will fit the bit nicely. There's not too many standout tracks on here, although In the Garden was a popular live track of his for many years. Lyrically, it's quite standard Van fare with songs about Belfast, spirituality and enlightenment. And like a lot of Van's music, it's a grown-ups record. And good enough for Colin Larkin to put it at number 977 in his all-time top 1000 list. At number 9, from 1982, I'm going to put his 13th studio album, Beautiful Vision. Now, despite the fairly 80s artwork on here, the album manages to avoid the pitfalls of a lot of Van's contemporaries at the time. Here, the drums are natural and the instrumentation is organic. He's deliberately decided to return to those Celtic roots with the music in an age when his contemporaries are all sort of plugging in the drum machine and the synthesizer and rolling up their suit jacket sleeves. Thematically, Van is singing a lot about spirituality again, and again, there's a lack of urgency here on the records, but it's a lovely mellow wash of early 80s singer-songwriter music, and there are some neat grooves and lovely catchy songs on here like Cleaning Windows and Dweller on the Threshold. Other standouts include Van Lowe's Stairway, and Mark Knopfler pops up to do pretty much what Mark Knopfler always pops up to do, and that's add a sprinkling of very tasteful, lovely guitar everywhere. But at number 8, I'm going to put from 1978 his 10th album, Wavelength. On what was to become his biggest selling album to date, Wavelet sees Van explore a far more mainstream sound than he has done before. This is almost a pop record with synths, funky beats, and a much more commercial vibe all around from the cover to the music. The songs reflect quite a few stages of Van's life and career, and standouts here include the lovely Hungry for Your Love, which was in the Officer and Gentleman soundtrack, and the epic Take It Where You Find It. And you've got the modest hit single title track here as well. It's all very listenable, and mainly again in a very undemanding way, but a lot of critics found it very underwhelming for a man of such ample talents, and some even calling it a sort of a failed pop record. But his record company were very happy with it, and probably expected this to be the start of Van's big pop 80s payday. But of course it didn't quite go like that, as Van's 80s output ended up being perhaps more mercurial than they had hoped. Still, it went gold, and it is the go-to album when you want your Van a little bit more mainstream. At number 7, I'm going to put his fourth solo album from 1970, his band and the Street Choir. This album began as a bunch of very basic demos recorded in a church in Woodstock, where he was living at the time. Many say he moved up there to ingratiate himself with Bob Dylan, which didn't quite work out because Dylan had left by the time Van got there. Many of the songs were leftovers from Moondance, but then he moved to A&R Studios in New York City, intending to turn these demos into some kind of a cappella record with a choir singing behind him, hence the Street Choir part of the album title. But he abandoned those plans, and he finally decided to make a folky, soulful record with a vibe that has perhaps less of a jazz influence than some of the work we'd expected from him at the time. The album opens with Domino, which is another Van standard, which to this day remains his most successful hit single in America. And the whole album is very easy Van listen, though some critics noticed lyrically it was perhaps a little bit less profound than his previous two albums. Highlights include I'll Be Your Lover 2, Gypsy Queen, Crazy Face, but there isn't really a bad track on this album, and it's a simple record with minimal overdubs that succeeds on the strength of Van's voice and the full force of his musical spirit. At number 6, from 1979, his 11th solo album, Into the Music. Now, this was a return to a more traditional Van sound after the pop detour of Wavelength, which we've just talked about. You've got horns, violins, acoustic guitars, and very welcomed by the critics. They were too. Van had been staying with my old pal Herbie in the countryside, and the sound and subject of these songs reflect that kind of bucolic environment. The whole album's lyrically very positive and upbeat, and there's a real spiritual positivity for what was going to become but Van was going to become more and more well known about over the decades progressed. As the decades progressed, the album opens with the pretty upbeat 1-2 knockout punch of Bright Side of the Road and Full Force Gale, two Van classics. And many felt that this was his best album since Moondance, and as much as I like it, though, it just doesn't have that final last magical ingredient which I think all the great albums need, and that's atmosphere. I think all the best albums need to drip with atmosphere, and it adds that sort of glow and aura around a record that's very hard to pin down. That said, it's a fine collection of songs, with no less than Robert Christgau putting it at the fourth best record of the year in his own list. At number 5, from 1971, I'm going to put his fifth solo album, Tupelo Honey. So still living in rural Woodstock with his then wife, Tupelo Honey reflects on that kind of domestic contentment you'd expect him to have in such a situation. This was originally going to be a country and western album of all things, but he abandoned many of those original songs for that idea and decided to leave Woodstock when post-Woodstock Festival and Woodstock Film, the whole world and its sister wanted to move to the area, and he found himself being crowded out. He moved out west to San Francisco, put a new band together, and he's described this period as pretty stressful, but you wouldn't know it listening to the album. And with song titles like Old Woodstock and Starting a New Life, they clearly reflect where his songwriting inspirations were at the time. Wildlife is one of his best album openers, but the whole record's full of really charming songs like straight to your heart like a cannonball. And the album was well received and it went gold. And it was Village Voice's fourth best album of the year. And although Van Morrison has said on occasion he wasn't happy with it, it's become known as one of his more likeable albums. So that takes us to the top four. And I think these are the top four go-to Van Morrison albums personally. But obviously, if you disagree, say so in the comments below. But go gentle, I'm not well. At number four, I'm going to put his sixth album from 1972, St. Dominic's Preview. Now this opens with one of Van Morrison's greatest songs, Jackie Wilson Said. And this is a real strong, heady mix of all Van's influences. But as with as with Tupelo Honey, in much more sort of straight song form, which is not something you might necessarily expect from Van Morrison, but we'll come to that. There are a couple of tracks here that allude to the more intangible music of something like Astral Weeks. I mean, Listen to the Lion and Almost Independence Day. But the reviews were very, very good, with critics seeing it as a real perfect distillation of all the good things about Van Morrison. And indeed, it's apparently one of his own favourite albums. Got to number 15 on the Billboard charts, and that would remain his highest placing there for 35 years. And Colin Larkin put this at number 71 on his all-time top 1,000 albums list. At number 3, though, from 1974, I'm going to put his 8th solo album, Vedan Fleece. Now, this is regarded by some as Van's forgotten masterpiece. He wrote this in 3 weeks on a trip back to Ireland after his divorce. And, at times it feels to me like a bit of a cross between Moondance and Astral Weeks. And it has elements of both of those albums. And certainly if you're a fan of those, you will definitely like this. There are many people who actually think this is Van Morrison's greatest record. It acoustically, again, subtly brings together elements of folk, Celtic music, jazz, soul, blues to create that unmistakable Van Morrison sound, Celtic soul. Lyrically, it follows a similar theme to Astral Weeks in that it's a bit of a stream of consciousness style. Highlights include Fabulous Streets of Arklow, where Van's voice sort of soars above this acoustic orchestral backing. The 8-minute You Pull No Punches, But You Don't Push the River is wonderful. And Bulbs is one of those kind of just effortlessly laid back but jaunty tracks he does so well. He can just sort of seem to rifle off at will. Having said all this, the album had a poor reception, with some calling it uninspired and self-indulgent. But I think time has been very kind to this record. And if you want to look at it as kind of a sort of slight Astral Weeks Part 2, whilst not being remotely in that same league, I think it's a fine companion piece. So that brings us to the top two. And number 2, it's going to be, what they're going to be, don't you? Number 2, I'm going to put his third solo album from 1970, Moondance. So after the dismal commercial failure of Astral Weeks, Van moved to Upstate New York, which we've talked about, going near Woodstock, the Catskills, and decided to abandon the freestyle stream of consciousness jazz vibe in favour of a much, much more conventional song structure. And the result is probably Van's most well-known album, thanks to a massive radio classic in the title track, but also a really magnificent supporting cast of songs like And It Stoned Me, Caravan and Crazy Love. It was a commercial and a huge critical success, and this is the album that established Van as a major artist, drawing heavily from his rhythm and blues and soul influences, and he meshed them up with his Celtic folk roots. And the resulting is a sound that's probably, the archetypal Van Morrison music. Ally that with an almost sort of transcendental approach to mysticism, nature, love and spirituality in his lyrics, and you get a powerful, powerful blend that I think probably reaches its apex on a song like Mystic Wind, which in my humble opinion is one of the most profoundly beautiful songs ever written. The album was well received by fans across many genres, and because of its clean, effortless, breezy sound, it's now regarded as one of the albums that anticipated AOR radio and one of the records that would dominate radio in the 1970s. It's now regarded as one of the greatest albums of all time. Rolling Stone put it at number 65 in their top 500 list. But many Van fans, I'm sure, would agree that it deserves to be even higher. So that, of course, takes us to our number one Van Morrison record. And if you haven't guessed, it is, of course, his second solo album from 1968, Astral Weeks. Few albums, I think, are as divisive as this extraordinary record. I mean, every now and then a record comes along that really just sounds like nothing else at all. Nothing you've heard before. And you know, at the time, Van was experimenting with a real stream of consciousness style of lyric, but also you can hear a stream of consciousness style in the playing and the music as well. The results are a really beautiful, ethereal combination of acoustic jazz, folk and blues, and classical music as well, that at the time the general public really didn't quite know how to take. Of course, over the years it's been reappraised, possibly more than any other rock album in history. It's now regarded as an absolutely unique classic. And it's often held up as Exhibit A in any trials debating Van Morrison's genius. Van had made his post-them debut with his first solo album, Blowing Your Mind, in 1967, which had been a bit of a lightweight record, but it did show promise with a track like Brown Eyed Girl on it. But after a long and quite nasty protracted dispute with his record company, he finally got himself free and signed for Warner Brothers and was given the freedom to make the music he wanted to make. But you know, he was a bit broken and browbeaten by the protracted contractual dispute, and I think he found a lot of solace in the sound booth in the studio, where he would retreat to with his acoustic guitar and his voice, accompanied by a very sparse acoustic band, including an upright bass guitar. And there were no cue sheets for the musicians. And every musician just had to sort of follow the mood. And, you know, you can absolutely hear that in all of the music here. Some people think this is a concept album, but I've read and heard it better described as a sort of song cycle, where all the music kind of bleeds into one, with Van's powerful voice holding it all together. A lot of people don't like it. It's too freeform, and they find his voice too abrasive for the music. But I think if you can get past that, this is some of the most ethereal and esoteric music that's ever been made. The title track, Sweet Thing, Cypress Avenue, Beside You. The titles are almost irrelevant for the reasons we've just talked about. And the reviews were very mixed, but over time the album's unique beauty and its intensity has only deepened. And although it's probably still something of a cult album, it's one that's pretty much universally admired by critics. I've got very, very happy memories of playing songs from this album live with Herbie late into the night, so I have a lot of extra affection for it as well. It's number 16 in Colin Larkin's all-time top 1,000 albums, 19 on Rolling Stone's list, and all that aside's irrelevant with music like this. You know, its resonance is far deeper in how it's affected other singer-songwriters, and it was a massive influence on a wide range of artists, from Bruce Springsteen to Elvis Costello to Joan Armatrading and many, many others. So that's my top 10 Van Morrison albums. Having said all this, I have to say the Van Morrison album I probably think is the best of all, which I don't allow into these lists because it's a live album, and that's the magnificent Too Late to Stop Now from 1974. It's a fabulously exciting live album that just brings together all his best songs at the time, performed by an artist absolutely at the top of his game. That said, the top four here are undoubtedly the go-to records if you're looking to get into Van Morrison. So if you are, happy exploring. So I am now going to put some cocoa on and retire to the sofa and watch a great movie, because I'm not feeling great at all. But look, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I will be back very soon with another Rock Records review. Thank you. Bye-bye.